Hey, church. Good to be with you again here on Monday. Pray and trust that you had a blessed Easter in these trying times. I'm hopeful that you had a chance to taste a little bit of the resurrection yesterday and celebrate it for its reality, for the truth that it communicates, that God leaves nothing and no one for dead. That he's going to restore all things, that he's bringing all things back to him. And this is the hope that we live with. Even in the deep valleys, we live with this hope in our eyes on this horizon line, that God will gather all things together and that he will bring them back to himself and restore them and make all things new. That's the truth that we live in light of. Yesterday was Easter, but now it's Eastertide. According to the church calendar, the season of Easter actually lasts at least the next 50 days, up until Pentecost. And this idea that Easter is a season reflects a couple of things. It reflects this idea that Jesus doesn't just resurrect and appear and then take off, but he walks with his disciples for another 40 days. We find that out in the book of Acts, and we find Jesus appearing to his disciples and spending time with them in the various Gospels. And he's recalibrating their hopes, restoring them in those 40 days. And what he's really doing is he's teaching them to live in light of the resurrection. Resurrection is not just a past event, but for 40 days, he's teaching them to live in light of this resurrection. And then, of course, we see the disciples do just that when it comes to Pentecost, which is 50 days later. 50 days after the resurrection, Peter stands up. He's new. He's living in light of the resurrection. He has come to have his hopes placed in the exact right place, in the work of God and the kingdom that has come. And so he stands bravely and speaks to the crowd and prophesies, and there's this truth that spills out, and the movement takes root as they learn to live in light of the resurrection. But I want to turn our attention to an unlikely character this morning or this afternoon. I want to think about Judas for just a second. I wonder if it surprises you or unsettles you to think that I find myself heartbroken for Judas. Maybe you're already there, actually. Maybe you're years ahead of me on this idea that we should be so heartbroken for Judas. Judas, who didn't have the eyes to see what the kingdom was really like. Judas, whose hopes couldn't be recalibrated, or he wouldn't allow them to be recalibrated. This same Judas, we find out in the book of Matthew, was overcome with remorse. When he saw that Jesus was condemned to die, he was crushed. He was crushed at the role that he had played in it. Here's what it says in Matthew chapter 27, starting in verse 1. This is before the crucifixion actually takes place. It says, "Early in the morning, all the chief priests and the elders of the people made their plans how to have Jesus executed. So they bound him, led him away, and handed him over to Pilate, the governor. When Judas, who had betrayed him, saw that Jesus was condemned, he was seized with remorse and returned the 30 pieces of silver to the chief priests and the elders. 'I have sinned,' he said, 'for I have betrayed innocent blood.' 'What is that to us?' they replied. 'That's your responsibility.' So Judas threw the money into the temple and left. Then he went away and hanged himself." We see Judas give up on himself in a way that I'm sure Jesus never would have. Here's one way I know Jesus would never have given up on Judas. The verses just prior to Judas giving up on himself tell us about Peter's betrayal of Jesus, Peter's denial of Jesus. At the core, what Peter does and what Judas does are almost parallel actions. But Jesus never gave up on Peter. We follow along with Peter's story and we see Jesus teaching Peter to live in light of the resurrection. Something Judas never allowed to happen. Judas had his hopes placed in the wrong location and never came to learn what it would look like to truly put his hope in Jesus. This is a time in my life where I'm learning that there are other places that I have placed my hope. Sometimes small, sometimes really insignificant things. Things on the horizon line that help me get through my day or my week or my month, thinking, well, summer vacation's coming, or if we could just make it to that tax return. But I'm finding in this time period, all of my hopes are being recalibrated, much like Peter's hopes were being recalibrated. And one of the things that I'm heartbroken about is this idea that anybody like Judas would give up on themselves and not allow Jesus to recalibrate their hopes, to help them to live in light of the resurrection. Here's the thing. Judas went to the wrong place when he realized he had done wrong. When he realized he was broken, he went to the temple priests. And what did they say to him? They say, "What's that to us? That's your problem." What if he had gone to Jesus instead? What if he had gone actually to the cross? I wonder if he would have seen that even in that moment of death, God was beginning to bring things to life. I actually think, man, if he had just held on a little longer, he would have seen that God brings things to life. So I have 3 simple questions that I'm asking myself and that I think may be helpful for you to ask yourself as we go through this difficult valley together. First question, are you placing your hopes on Jesus alone? Where do you go? Where do you go when you realize you're in need? Is it like Judas that you're tempted to go to locations other than Jesus to find restoration, to find real restoration? Or are you letting God tune your heart to sing his praise only? Are you letting God calibrate your heart and your eyes on the horizon line of the resurrection? Are you going to Jesus for hope, like Peter learned to do? My second question is, are you learning to see yourself the way that Jesus sees you? I think that Judas must not have. I think that Judas must not have understood that if he had gone to the cross, Jesus would have looked down on him from the cross with compassion and mercy and grace. The way that he would later restore Peter with compassion and mercy and grace, I believe Judas would have found that to be true of Jesus, because that's who Jesus is. Peter came to see himself the way Jesus sees him, as a beloved one of God, as a restored one. And because of that, he began to live in light of the resurrection. Think of the way that Peter actually brings Paul into the flock, so to speak. Maybe not as powerfully and as obviously as Barnabas, but Peter welcomes Paul, the murderer Paul, into Jerusalem and into the church. And as we find out in Galatians chapter 2, into his own home. He speaks with Paul. Peter, who came to see himself the way Jesus sees him, began to see others the way Jesus sees them too. I wonder if you're seeing yourself the way that Jesus sees you. You know that God teaches to forgive. Maybe you need to begin with yourself. Maybe you need to begin with the truth that Jesus forgives you and loves you. Third question, are you a good one to go to when people find themselves broken and remorseful? Are you a safe haven? There are times in my life where I have to confess I've been more like the temple priests, saying, this is what comes of your actions. What is that to me? This is the life you chose for yourself. I would love to see my life as a trajectory away from the reaction of the temple priests and towards the reaction of Jesus. Away from the way the temple priests treated Judas and towards the way Jesus treated Peter, and I know would have treated Judas. Towards being a safe haven for the broken and hurting. Being a safe haven for those who are finding that their hopes need to be recalibrated. I think in this season, the church needs to be a place that people can go, where they can find that their hopes are met in Jesus, that their lives are restored, that that there's a safe place for them in the hands of God and in the midst of the church. I wonder if we can live in light of the resurrection so fully and so powerfully that people don't give up hope on themselves. Not on our watch, not in our purview, not in our context. That when people come to us, we would say, I may not be able to help you perfectly on my own, but I know one who can. Let's go there together. I wonder if the church could live actually fully and powerfully in light of the resurrection, and not just for these 50 days of Eastertide, but for the months and years that God grants us here to continue walking side by side with him, bringing heaven to earth. Let's be about our Father's business. Let's get to work. I pray you have a blessed week. Don't forget to be checking your email for chances to connect with Vista and the prayer time with Pastor Brian and Pastor Justin on Wednesday and the worship on Thursday. Let's continue meeting together. Even though our circumstances are trying, let's live in light of the resurrection. God bless you.